316. That is the number of Russian soldiers lost for every single square kilometer of ground gained in Donetsk this spring. Not per month, not per campaign, per square kilometer. To put that in perspective, that rate has doubled since the same period last year, when the cost was already staggering at 160 soldiers per square kilometer. Russia's so-called spring offensive is not just stalling. It is hemorrhaging manpower at a pace never before recorded in modern European warfare. And the bleeding is not slowing down. It is accelerating. In the next few minutes, we are going to break down exactly how Ukraine's drone-dominated fortress defense is grinding the largest army in Europe into irrelevance. Why Russia is now losing more soldiers than it can recruit for the fourth consecutive month, and what Putin's desperate ultimatum demanding Ukraine abandon the Donbass by the end of May actually reveals about the Kremlin's panic behind closed doors. This is a story Moscow does not want you to hear. And by the end, you will understand why some analysts believe the Russian military has crossed a threshold from which there is no recovery. To understand the full scale of this disaster, we need to start with what Russia set out to do in March 2026. The Kremlin launched what analysts are now calling the Russian Spring Offensive, a concentrated push aimed at capturing the remaining 7,000 square kilometers of Donetsk Oblast and declaring total control over the Donbass region. This was supposed to be the defining campaign, the one that would justify 4 years of grinding relentless war. The campaign that would finally let Putin walk into a negotiation room and claim he had achieved his core military objective. The prize was enormous. Full control of both Donetsk and Luhansk would give Moscow the ability to declare that the so-called special military operation had accomplished what it was always designed to do. But to get there, Russia had to push through some of the most heavily defended terrain in the entire conflict. According to Pavlo Polisa, deputy head of President Zelensky's office, who released the figures in early April, Russian forces suffered casualties at a rate of 316 soldiers per square kilometer seized during the first quarter of 2026 in Donetsk alone. That figure was published by United 24 Media and has been widely cited across Ukrainian and Western outlets. And the territorial result of all that cost, according to AFP reporting via RTE on April 2, March 2026, was the month in which Russia gained virtually no ground across the entire front line. The Guardian confirmed that it was the first month since the full-scale invasion began where Russian territorial gains were effectively negligible on every axis of advance. To be clear about what this means, Russia launched a major offensive and in terms of ground gained achieved almost nothing measurable on the map. Now here is where the data becomes truly devastating for Moscow. Independent military analyst Andrew Perpetua, who is widely regarded as one of the most meticulous open-source trackers of this conflict, published his monthly analysis on April 8th. Perpetua reviews approximately 300 combat videos every single day, drawn from more than 2,000 social media sources. His methodology is painstaking and has been cited by major Western media outlets throughout the war. He cross-references footage with geolocation data unit identifications and satellite imagery to produce what many consider the most reliable independent casualty estimates available outside classified intelligence channels. His conclusion for March 2026 was unambiguous. It was the fourth deadliest month of the entire war for Russian forces in terms of confirmed personnel losses. The confirmed figure stood at 5,771 Russian soldiers in just 31 days. That represents an increase of roughly 40% compared to March 2025, when the figure was 4,113. And what did Russia gain for nearly 6,000 confirmed losses in a single month 23 square kilometers. That is the lowest single-month territorial gain since February 2022, when the war began. Russia paid a higher price than in any previous spring and got less ground than ever before. But this frontline picture, as grim as it is, only tells half the story. The deeper crisis is unfolding behind Russian lines, and we will get to that in a moment. The reason Russia's spring offensive is disintegrating in real time can be understood through one dominant factor: the absolute supremacy of Ukrainian drone warfare. According to Politico reporting in January 2026, unmanned aerial systems now account for approximately 3/4 of all casualties along the front line. 80% of all Ukrainian offensive strikes are delivered by drone. This is no longer a war of trenches and massed artillery in any traditional sense. It has become something entirely new in the history of warfare. It is a war of machines against men. And Ukraine has refined this asymmetry into an almost industrial-scale architecture of precision destruction that Russia has found no effective way to counter. The first layer of this system is the FPV drone, the first-person view kamikaze drone that has become the single most lethal weapon platform in this entire conflict. These small, agile, and devastatingly cheap systems cost as little as a few $100s each and can be manufactured in enormous quantities. They patrol continuously along what defense analysts and Ukrainian military planners have dubbed the Fortress Belt. This is the fortified urban defensive zone, anchored by 4 cities that stand directly in the path of any Russian advance deeper into Donetsk, Slovyansk, Kramatorsk, Druzhkivka, and Kostiantynivka. Ukraine has spent months turning these cities and the terrain between them into a multi-layered defensive network, unlike anything Russia has encountered before. Every approach road, every tree line, every stretch of open ground is under constant drone surveillance around the clock. Russian infiltration groups, the small units of 5 to 15 soldiers sent forward to probe and penetrate Ukrainian positions, are being systematically identified and neutralized by FPV drones operating in coordinated swarms, often before the Russian soldiers can even come within rifle range of the first Ukrainian defensive line. Al Jazeera, reporting on April 10th, cited Ukrainian claims that drone strikes accounted for 96% of Russian personnel losses in the most recent reporting period. Even if that precise figure carries a degree of wartime inflation, the overall trajectory is unmistakable and confirmed by independent analysts. Russia is sending men into kill zones saturated with autonomous precision weapons, and the results are devastating beyond anything conventional military doctrine was designed to handle. This is what analysts call a metal monstrosities environment, where Ukraine's drones on the ground, in the air, and even on the water have created an overlapping web of surveillance and striking power that no infantry advance can simply push through with numbers alone. The second layer of Ukraine's drone architecture operates at medium range, reaching well beyond the contact line to strike Russian rear positions. These drones are not targeting frontline infantry. They are hunting the infrastructure that makes Russian operations possible: command posts, where officers coordinate attacks, drone control centers that direct Russia's own unmanned systems, ammunition depots that feed the artillery, and logistical staging areas where troops and equipment gather before deployment. The operational logic is simple and ruthlessly effective. If you sever the brain from the body stops functioning. Russian field commanders are discovering that positions they believed were safely beyond Ukrainian reach, sometimes 20 or 30 kilometers behind the front, are now within the engagement envelope of systems that cost a fraction of a single Russian artillery shell. Headquarters that once coordinated battalion-level operations with relative security are being struck with a precision that disrupts not just individual missions, but entire operational planning cycles. And when a command post is destroyed, the units that depended on it for orders, intelligence, and coordination become disoriented and far more vulnerable to the FPV swarms waiting for them along the contact line. This is asymmetric warfare in its most refined and devastating form. Ukraine does not need to match Russia soldier for soldier or tank for tank. It needs only to ensure that every Russian position, from the forward trench to the rearmost supply depot, exists within reach of something small, fast, cheap, and accurate. We bring you the full picture, not just the headlines. So hit subscribe to ensure you stay ahead of the curve. Now, the third, and perhaps most strategically significant dimension of Russia's crisis is the manpower collapse that is slowly but unmistakably strangling Moscow's ability to continue fighting at this intensity. According to TVP World, between December 2025 and March 2026, Russia lost approximately 85,000 military personnel across all fronts. During that same 4-month window, Russian recruitment and mobilization efforts managed to bring in only 80,456 new soldiers. That means for 4 consecutive months, Russia has been losing more troops than it can replace. This is not a minor statistical detail. This is the critical threshold that every military planner in the world fears, the exact point at which an army begins to shrink, not because of a single catastrophic defeat, but because of slow, grinding, day-after-day attrition that simply outpaces the nation's ability to fill the ranks. In the first quarter of 2026 alone, total Russian losses exceeded 90,000 personnel, with more than 35,000 of those concentrated in the Donetsk sector. These are not numbers that any military force on Earth can absorb indefinitely, especially one that is simultaneously attempting to hold and advance along a front line stretching well over 1,000 kilometers. The math is unforgiving. Every month that Russia continues to lose more than it recruits, the army gets smaller. And a smaller army attempting the same offensive objectives means even higher casualties per engagement, which accelerates the shrinkage further. It is a death spiral, and by every available measure, Russia is already inside it. And this is where things get even more serious for the Kremlin, because the problems eating away at Russia's combat power are not limited to the battlefield. Internal dysfunction within the Russian military establishment is compounding the losses at every level. Multiple reports from Ukrainian intelligence and Western analysts have documented widespread corruption among Russian unit commanders, some of whom are allegedly accepting bribes to keep individual soldiers away from frontline deployments. This means that even the manpower Russia does possess on paper is not being effectively delivered to the units that desperately need reinforcements. Beyond corruption, Russian forces have suffered devastating blows to their command and communication infrastructure. The loss of access to Starlink satellite internet, which Russian units had illicitly obtained and relied upon for tactical coordination in earlier phases of the war, has degraded situational awareness across multiple formations. The disruption of Telegram, the messaging platform that had become the de facto command network for Russian tactical units, has further fractured the ability of Russian officers to coordinate operations in real time. The combined effect is severe. Soldiers are arriving at the front with less training, less functional equipment, less communication capability, and less information about the battlefield than at any previous point in the war. And perhaps the most disturbing indicator of the collapse in Russian military morale is a detail that has emerged from debriefings of captured Russian soldiers. Multiple reports indicate that some Russian troops have been found carrying printed documents containing instructions for taking their own lives in the event of capture. That is not the hallmark of an army that believes it is winning. That is not the behavior of soldiers who trust their command structure or their nation's cause. That is the signature of a system that has abandoned its own people and knows it. We explored the full scope of this internal military disintegration in our recent video on how 600,000 Russian soldiers are fighting not just against Ukraine, but against their own corrupt and failing system. That context is essential to understanding what we are seeing now on the Donetsk front. The fourth dimension of Russia's unraveling is strategic, and it may ultimately prove the most consequential of all. On March 31st, President Zelensky publicly revealed that Russia had issued a formal ultimatum demanding that Ukraine withdraw entirely from the Donbass region, encompassing both Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts, before the end of May 2026. This ultimatum was clearly designed to be backed by the overwhelming military pressure of the spring offensive, the unstoppable force that would compel Kyiv to accept Moscow's terms or face complete destruction in the east. Instead, the precise opposite has unfolded. The offensive has stalled against Ukraine's fortress belt. Losses have shattered every previous record, and Ukraine has responded not by retreating or suing for peace, but by launching counterattacks in entirely new sectors of the front. Ukrainian forces have pushed toward Oleksandrivka and Huliaipole in Zaporizhia Oblast, opening fresh axes of pressure that serve a dual strategic purpose. They force Russia to divert scarce elite units away from the critical Donetsk front, directly weakening the very offensive that Russia has staked its entire strategy on. And they send a powerful signal to the international community that Ukraine retains the operational initiative and the confidence to go on the offensive, even while absorbing Russia's heaviest and most desperate blow. The Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, noted in their assessment, dated March 26th, that Russia's push toward the fortress belt cities is encountering increasingly organized, layered, and technologically sophisticated defenses, and that the cost of even the most minor territorial advances is approaching levels that are strategically unsustainable for Moscow. Meanwhile, in Luhansk Oblast, Russia has repeatedly claimed to control 99.84% of the territory, but even that claim is crumbling under scrutiny. As CNN reported on April 4th, two settlements, Novohorivka and Nadia, remain stubbornly outside Russian control, and Moscow's multiple triumphant declarations of complete Luhansk capture have proven premature every single time they have been issued. This pattern of inflated victory claims followed by humiliating corrections extends across the entire theater of operations. The Kremlin announces triumph, while the evidence on the ground tells a very different and far more painful story. So what does all of this mean for the broader trajectory of this war? Russia's spring offensive was designed to be the decisive campaign, the operation that would finally secure the Donbass and hand Putin the political and territorial victory he has pursued relentlessly since February 2022. Instead, it has become the most expensive military operation of the entire war when measured by the ratio of casualties to territory gained. The fortress belt of Slovyansk, Kramatorsk, Druzhkivka, and Kostiantynivka remains fully intact and is growing more formidable by the week as Ukraine integrates new drone systems, reinforces defensive positions, and refines the coordination between FPV operators, medium-range strike teams, and conventional ground forces. Russia's manpower reserves are depleting faster than recruitment can replenish them, creating a compounding deficit that grows wider with each passing month. And the internal rot of corruption, communication failures, degraded training pipelines, and collapsing morale is eroding whatever combat effectiveness the Russian military still possesses from within. Consider the trajectory from a pure numbers perspective. According to Fortune reporting in February 2026, the cumulative military casualties from this war have already surpassed 2 million across both sides. But the burden falls disproportionately on Russia which is the attacking force, and which must concentrate its troops in precisely the areas where Ukraine's drone coverage is densest. The winter months of December 2025 through February 2026 produced 3 consecutive record-setting months for Russian losses, a period that analysts have grimly labeled the general winter phase, not because cold weather favored Russia as it historically has, but because the cold did nothing to stop the drones, and frozen open terrain offered Russian infantry even less concealment than the summer months. Spring was supposed to bring relief and momentum. Instead, it brought the worst casualty-to-gain ratio in the entire war. And here is the detail that should alarm every strategist in the Kremlin. Russia's artillery, once the dominant arm of its military, still possesses the range to strike all 4 fortress belt cities. Slovyansk, Kramatorsk, Druzhkivka, and Kostiantynivka are all within reach of Russian guns and Russian drones. But shelling cities and actually capturing them are 2 entirely different military problems. Motonghin Khong, Tramle Mot Vuot, Kwa Motonghin Kitu. 4 consecutive months where more soldiers were lost than recruited. Russia is not conquering Donetsk. It is being bled dry in the attempt, and the rate of bleeding is only increasing. The question that now hangs over this conflict is no longer whether Russia can sustain this offensive. The evidence has already answered that question decisively. The real question is how long before the Kremlin is forced to confront the reality that the cost has become unbearable, and what happens when that moment of strategic reckoning finally arrives. The answer could reshape the entire war. We examined the economic lifelines still sustaining Russia's war machine in our coverage of how Ukraine struck at critical fuel routes through Volgograd and Crimea, severing the arteries that keep Putin's military running. What comes next could change everything. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to see more of our coverage of Russia's spring offensive and the war in Ukraine. And thank you as always for watching.